You know their names. You see them on buildings, in the news, everywhere. American dynasties, they're a huge part of our national story. But what happens when that story has a really dark side? When the legacy they leave behind is one of pain?
So that leads us to a pretty provocative question. Who is America's most violent family? Now, the answer is nowhere near as simple as you might think. And honestly, just by trying to answer it, we have to ask ourselves something much deeper. What does violence even mean? Okay, so first, let's look at the kind of violence we're all familiar with. The kind that's personal, direct, and, well, it leaves a trail of blood. These are the stories of powerful families who seemed to have it all, but were still at the center of some truly brutal acts.
Our first stop takes us to the low country of South Carolina, and a legal dynasty that seemed completely untouchable for about a century, the Murdaughs. Their fall from grace was, wow, as swift as it was shocking.
See, the Murdaughs weren't just some prominent legal family, they were basically an institution down there. And it all came crashing down when Alex Murdaugh was convicted of murdering his own wife and son. But believe it or not, that verdict was just the tip of the iceberg. The whole investigation started peeling back all these layers of complex financial crimes and even several other suspicious deaths linked to the family. The real takeaway here is the allegation that their deep, long-standing influence might have acted like a shield, delaying any real accountability for years.
And this pattern of wealth and, well, seeming impunity, it isn't just a one-off thing with the Murdaughs. Let's think about another famous American name, DuPont. We're talking about a chemical empire with a fortune once in the tens of billions. But it's also a story that's been marked by some shocking violence and controversy.
Yeah, the DuPont legacy is stained by two really disturbing incidents. First, you have the heir John DuPont, who murdered Olympic wrestler Dave Schultz back in 1996. Then, in a completely separate and just horrific case, another heir, Robert Richards IV, was convicted of raping his own 3-year-old daughter. But it was what happened after that conviction that sparked this huge national outrage. He only got probation. And the judge's reasoning, get this, that he would not fare well in prison. It just raised these profound questions about whether having enough money can literally buy you a different, softer kind of justice.
Okay, so up until now, we've been talking about direct physical violence. But what if harm can be inflicted on a much, much bigger scale without a single shot ever being fired? This is where our whole definition of violence starts to get a lot more complicated. And that brings us to our second category, violence by prescription. This is where the harm is indirect, it's systemic, and the consequences are absolutely devastating for hundreds of thousands of people. This is a powerful accusation. The most evil family in America. It's been leveled directly at our next case study. Now, whether you agree with that label or not, it points right at the massive controversy surrounding the Sackler family.
So who are the Sacklers? Well, they're the family that owned Purdue Pharma. And Purdue Pharma is the company behind OxyContin, a powerful prescription painkiller whose story is now just tragically tangled up with a national health crisis.
Hundreds of thousands. Just let that number sink in for a minute.
Because that number, that represents the human cost. Hundreds of thousands of overdose deaths have been linked to the opioid crisis in America, a crisis that critics argue was pretty much ignited and then fueled by the aggressive and allegedly deceptive marketing of OxyContin. The accusations are just damning. The Sacklers and Purdue Pharma are accused of knowingly downplaying how ridiculously addictive their drug was, all while pushing it hard on doctors and patients. They made an immense profit while the crisis was just spiraling out of control. And while they did face massive lawsuits that drove their company into bankruptcy, the family itself has, for the most part, managed to protect their vast personal fortunes.
So all of this brings up a really crucial question about perception. I mean, how do we draw the line between a wealthy dynasty that gets caught up in a scandal and what we'd normally call a straight-up criminal enterprise?
So check this out, because it's a really fascinating contrast. On one side, you've got these wealthy dynasties. Their fortunes are built on businesses that look legitimate from the outside. Pharmaceuticals, chemicals. The harm they cause is often framed as just this unfortunate byproduct, and their influence can help shield them from the worst legal consequences. But on the other side, you have mafia families. Their entire business is explicit crime. Violence isn't some byproduct, it's a tool of the trade. They're labeled as criminal enterprises right from the start.
So when you put all of these cases together, from personal murder to a massive public health crisis, what's the common thread that ties them all together?
Well, the outcomes for these families are starkly different. For the Murdaughs, murder and fraud led to a prison sentence.
For the DuPonts, murder and child abuse resulted in both prison time and that incredibly controversial probation sentence. And for the Sacklers, fueling a crisis that tore communities apart resulted in corporate bankruptcy and fines, while the family largely got to keep their personal wealth. The legal consequences just seemed to vary wildly.
So, we started this by asking who the most violent family is, but that question, as sensational as it is, really misses the entire point. The real story, the one that truly matters here, is about the disturbing pattern you see when you look at all these cases. It's about how immense wealth and generations of influence can seemingly bend the arc of justice and completely redefine what accountability even looks like. And so, we're left with one final, pretty unsettling question. Does wealth, in fact, buy a different kind of justice? That's the question at the very heart of this whole explainer, and it's the one we'll leave with you.